and we're gonna let him start with kind of his process flow for fighting and I assume training, and then yeah, I know we've got a bunch of questions for him. So hopefully you enjoy listening in on a conversation with a bunch of us talking stick. So Alan, on your Grace, thanks for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Your Grace. It's a pleasure to be here. Happy birthday to you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
You don't look a day over 60.
It's the mileage.
Very familiar with it. Um, I'm really grateful for this opportunity to talk to you guys. You're absolutely some of my very favorite fights, and you know, without a doubt, my favorite people to listen to and to learn from. So to get an opportunity to visit with everyone today is really awesome. So over the years, after kind of learning how to fight out of a group that didn't necessarily have a lot of structure when I was really young, and we're talking 30 years ago, to understanding that you're never going to get any better if you don't start traveling and getting a chance to travel the known world and getting a chance to meet and see people and then actually find people who are really kind of teaching and training with methodologies. I definitely went from being a tall, athletic, fast person to hopefully someone who actually understands fighting, or is at least beginning to understand fighting. And it probably wasn't until I started hanging out with Brannos and Ragnvaldr at border raids, and then going to Candlemas, and then just, well, when are you guys coming south from Detroit? Because I want to make sure that we're coming up north and meet whenever. So it really wasn't until I had a chance to talk to them that my SCA fighting life clicked. So then when I had opportunities going forward to talk to people like Viscount Tristan, who, just a very dear friend of mine, I suddenly had a shared language to be able to talk to him about fighting from. And we were able to, I think, circle ourselves and start spinning ourselves up. And so all of this stuff was happening over the course of years. And again, I still hadn't seen a definitive book or anything else like that that really connected or clicked with me. So I was still always trying to work stuff that in my own head that worked for me, as well as things that I could teach, because I was very fortunate in the Shire of Rising Stone and Meridies to basically let it kind of be my fighter practice. And I structured it where, and I also got to do something that was, something I enjoy doing anyway. I really like teaching advanced fighting. I don't particularly love teaching the basics of fighting. I love working with people who have hit plateaus, so the challenge is, okay, how do I get you from this to the next step? Or how do you actually know how to do it? I just need to get you to understand you know how to do it and move forward. So I was able to work with His Grace Duke Seth, and then we spun each other up. And then, he would tell me when I was saying something is like, that's stupid, don't say it that way. Or he would say, could you just, dumb it down for us or stuff? And, so my language and how I think about it kind of really evolved over the years. So when I moved to Aidenvelt, I was new guy. I felt like I was new guy in the barony, and it was amazing practice. I mean, it's Duke, 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 count, 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 night, 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 and then a bunch of guys who are all wanting to be those. So the barony here had just a fantastic practice, and I was really cautious going in, which is weird because all these guys here know me, and I'm pretty full of myself. But I wanted to come in. I didn't want to just come in and go, all right, I want to start picking up where I left off. Who wants to be my student? Because that sounds really crappy. But it's really what I wanted to do. So I just went out and I just started fighting, and I had a number of guys very much, come up and say, hey, would you like to work on some stuff? And I was like, I'd love to work on some stuff. So over the years, I've been able to try to codify my approach to fighting. And I am not going to say anything you guys haven't heard. It's just maybe the order that I put them in, and sort of my approach or look at it. So the first thing is the guard. And it's the first and most important thing I believe there is about fighting. I think that if you have a mediocre guard, you're going to win fights inconsistently. If you have a good guard, the best thing that you could possibly do is learn to have a great guard. And if you have a great guard, keep working that guard, keep working that guard, because every single thing I think of about fighting starts with the guard. And when I say a guard, I mean it is the most defense that you possibly can get while still being able to throw 80+% of your shots. And if you're not working your guard all the time, then you are not actually improving. And I'll go do these little teaching things and people are like, show me this shot or show me this. And I'm like, we need to work on your guard. You don't need to learn any more shots. You need to stop walking around with a gap like this. You need to stop holding your sword and shield in pretty good position, but as soon as you bring a blow, you don't bring it back. You put it in someplace entirely different. So I'm very boring as a trainer. I don't really want to work on much of anything else till we've got the guard working. So everything starts with the guard and we'll come back with the guard. For me, and I believe that it's important no matter how you want to fight, the next important thing is range and your ability to assess and manage it. I understand that some people don't care. They're like, I don't care, I'll fight at C. And they're like, I don't care, I'll fight at B. I don't care, I'll fight at A. And I'm like, that's all great, but you better be aware of where you are and you better be able to know how to manage and do the things that you want to do. And most importantly, you really need to understand those transitions, because the transitions in range are where people die. It's where really good fighters die. They die in transition. And so, and I believe that comes from just a total focus on also being able to understand range and manage range, or at least be aware of range at all times, and yours and theirs. Then I very much quickly go into, you take those two things before you've ever really thrown blows, and you best do some quick assessment. And where am I, when I look at the guard, I'm like, check my guard. Do I need to do anything about it? If so, correct it. Look at their guard. Do I need to account for that guard? Oh gosh, yeah, they're left-handed. Because we sometimes actually forget that when we're ready to fight. But if you're always looking at your opponent's guard as well, then you're going to have that stuff squared away. Or, oh, he's holding his guard. We all know there's different ways you're going to hold your guard based off the length of your sword and your fighting preference and style. So check those things, and then it accounts for it. Then very quickly, I like to probe, and there's a lot of different ways you can say this, but now I want more information. I want to take what I've learned about them and what I know about myself, and I want to do some tests. And those tests, I think at the beginning of the fight, are almost entirely with your footwork, because you're not really in range yet to start probing with your sword. But not long after that, you are able to test, and it can be shots, it can be low risk setups and actual attacks, but these are primarily tests in case the fight actually progresses, that you're going to have to do serious analysis to be able to figure out how to win this fight. So it's important, I think, that you physically teach these things in steps, and then that you're constantly processing. So after I've probed again, I want to reassess. I want to take all that initial first bit of information, reassess it again. What did I learn from those tests? And I don't believe then that you say, okay, well, now I know how I want to win this fight. What you say is, now I want to test some more. Now I want to test differently. Because I understand some things based off those initial tests, but I've got more tests. So personally, for me, I think that you should go through these things before you really ever committed to a shot. And people are like, yeah, but you won that fight in 4 seconds. It's like, yeah, my probe killed them, but it was still a probe. It's still very much I was testing to see something, and the test came back. They don't block a headshot after you do something else. So, but it was still very much I was trying to gather information for the long fight. So I call that, and before every fight, even now after 30 years, I have to tell myself all the time, and I repeat to myself, guard, range, pace. Pace and probe, I stick in the same little slot. They're not the same thing, but I have to deliberately think about those things. And over the last several years, I changed that P also to be pressure, as I come to understand what Brannos means by applying pressure and working with pressure. I don't always want to be the one that's applying the pressure, but I think it's I don't even know how to say how important it is. You better be aware of it, because if your opponent is actually trying to apply that pressure and you're unaware of it, then you're a victim to it, or you're a tourist on the whole thing, and you don't want to be a tourist in a fight. It's a very interactive process. You want to be a part of it the whole way. So that stuff, again, terrible acronym: guard, range, assess, probe, and then reassess. So it's GRAPPA. And I believe that you do that twice before you even really start to get into the flow of the fight. So it's GRAPPA to flow. You do it twice. You've got to make sure that you're running through all those processes. And again, against a lot of guys, you don't get past it twice. Against you guys, I'm doing it 5, 8, 10 times, constant reanalysis of, okay, that didn't work. I need to come up with a different test. It it's a circular thing, and you can fall into the actual flow of the fight as soon as you feel like you've got enough information. And that's always going to be also part of the conversation you're having with your opponent. Your opponent at some point in the fight may tell you, okay, I've shown you enough, so then you can just get into the fight. And once you're into the flow of the fight, all of your trained setups and attacks are mostly muscle memory at that point, but you're putting yourself in position to do the right ones based off of all that initial testing and the constant reassessing of your own guard. Are you doing it right? Are you holding it up? Are you managing the range? So GRAPPA to flow. It's an absolutely terrible acronym, but it really helps me to make sure that I'm teaching all the component pieces. And when I'm fighting, it helps me stay focused, and to remember to constantly be processing all the time. And it's people, I de-romanticize fighting a lot. When I first started fighting, it was a very romantic thing for me. It felt very heroic. And now it's accounting. I want to do extremely um, low risk exercises that are going to bring back high reward. So if I see something, like I might be able to kill that guy that way, but then I tell myself, you're going to leave yourself open to do that. It's like, okay, well, let's not do that. So I go through all this process over and over and over again until I find the lowest risk, highest reward outcome I can get out of a fight. That's it in a nutshell.
So, I guess here's a piece for you. What you're saying is make it boring, right?
Yeah, absolutely, man. You know
Yeah,
that.
I know that. I know. And I agree 100%. I mean, what you're saying is, I really like the way you say it now, because people need to hear that over and over again. There's, talk to Ragnvaldr, we're processing constantly. People get into this idea that, empty mind. And I think every time it's like, there is empty mind. There is empty mind when executing technique, because your technique, you absolutely should know. But it's Masashi's war in the fight. We're constantly probing, trying, finding things out, leaving them, going and probing more, coming back to them, applying a little more pressure to see if they're actually just maybe waiting and drawing you into those, setting a trap or anything else. And then what happens is, we in that meantime, we have 3, 4, 5 other shots that we're looking at going, so this is the chess match. We're like, okay, now I have these opportunities, and then we'll execute one. He's like, this is what happened after I did that. He made that block and left that open. So now I'm going to go back, look at one of my other things I was doing, and then maybe I'm going to go back to that one because I made him do something naturally, and then take the thing he took.
Against a more inexperienced fighter, you can go ahead and, I've got new information, I'm going to test that instantly. But against an experienced fighter, you have to tell yourself, I'm going to come back to that. I can't just go to it now. He knows he just did that.
I agree. And the other piece of that is, I really like to use the idea and the use of the word pace, because pace changes, and you use that pace to change, because I tend to call it tempo, but you can change that pace, and your opponent may not actually change his pace, which gives you some different opportunities. Or they change their pace to a pace that's actually slower than you and leaves you with an opportunity. So by adding pace changes, height changes, all of these kinds of things, you're probing different ways. We're not just probing with pressure in areas, but we're also probing with up and downs. You see that in boxing. You're probing with change of tempo and see if they miss that tempo and make a mistake in that so that you can take advantage of it. Those are the kinds of things we're looking at.
Yeah, and some of what you're talking about there, is something that we talk a lot here on the coach's corner, and it's decision making process, right? There's a lot of people early on in their fight who want to, impose their will on their opponent and to make things happen. And one of the things I talk about is that it's easier to get somebody to do what they want to do than to get them to do what you want them to do. And so, imposing your will and trying to make certain things happen, well, that kind of depends on them responding to the stimulus in a predictable way. And what you're talking about is, you're probing for information, you're gathering this information. It's like, and that's something I talk about as well as probing. I talk about probing range, right? And the whole thing about that probe is, like you said, there's no intended shot there. I mean, the purpose of that is simply gathering information. There's no intent to throw anything, but like you said, when you kill that guy in 5 seconds, it's because you make that probe and they do something that triggers a response, and next thing you know, your hand just kind of flies off and hits him in the head. And you don't need that, but that was never your plan, right? I don't plan on going in and just hitting this guy in 5 seconds, but when they stick it out there, I'm going to cut it off. So yeah, it's to me, it's responding to the information that your opponent gives you, responding to, and it's what I refer to as, this is where the fight takes me.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm going to follow along with where the fight wants to go and where the fight wants to organically develop. But as you said, you want to let the fight kind of lead, and you want to kind of let the fight develop, but you don't want the fight to happen to you.
Right. And I totally love one of the things that you're saying there. All this stuff needs to be, you really need to fight without your ego. Trying to win on lay on is ridiculous. I want to understand how to win. I want to understand where I'm at today, and I want to understand where my opponent is at in this moment. And I want to understand how they are if I do some things and try to understand it. So you've got to take your ego out of that. I'm going to go win is the cart well before the horse. I want to go out and I want to understand, I want to have a conversation, and I want to give my opponent enough time so that he's very clear and I can understand what he or she is telling me, and what they may be telling me is I am totally intimidated and you can beat me at sea. They may be telling you something different, but I'm not in a hurry to find out that information. There's times I'll be in the middle of a fighter practice and I'll say, hold, what is going on here? And they're like, well, someone told me to be aggressive. And it's like, that's just a thing people say. And I'm really sorry that they say that. You need to be effective. You don't need to be aggressive. It can be aggressive if it's effective aggression, but most importantly, what you need to be is effective. But right now, what I need you to do is you're fighting like you've got 4 seconds left on the shot clock, but look over there. How many seconds do you actually have left? And they're like, what are you talking about? How many seconds are left on the shot clock? And they're like, there's no shot clock. And I'm like, yeah, I know. You don't have to be in a hurry to have this conversation. Let it happen. And then you can go forward. And the thing is you're not even giving yourself a time to learn anything. How are you going to learn anything when it's pure training? I mean, I talk a lot about this perspective from a tourney fighting standpoint, but this is the mindset I have to become a better fighter when I'm training, not just when I'm fighting to win a fight or fighting to do well. I need to put myself in a position that I'm receptive, that I'm understand. So set aside my ego, go do all the things that I think I understand well, but also be receptive to the things that I'm not doing well and I need to fix, and let my opponent teach me something today. So, and I know that everyone here kind of laughs too, because you understand that it's set aside your ego, but also we're all fairly egocentric person. I heard Brannos say this one day. We were sitting around and one of the fighters just said, well, I'm really only in it for the fun. And he kind of walked away, it was nice because they didn't need to hear this. But Brannos turns around and looks at me and says, winning's fun. It's like, yes, winning is fun.
Yeah, that's something that I've heard a lot over the years. This idea that's, oh well, fighting is supposed to be fun, and when when the fun's gone, then you shouldn't be fighting and all that. And I think as you get better, the fun changes, right? And it's not as much. I don't know. It's not the giddy laughing, sitting around and in hysterical laughter all the time. It's not that kind of fun. But it's enjoyable, and it is purposeful. And being able the amount of work that we all put into this to be exceptional. Yeah, it's a lot of work. But yeah, it's fun. It's just a different kind of fun, and it's not what people typically think of when they throw that word
Right.
out there.
It's not shits and giggles fun.
Right.
It's the joy in
Yeah.
having a craft or an art and having an opportunity to do it, to do your art, to do your craft. And if you've trained well for it, and then you execute well because you trained well, there's joy in that.
Right.
I also played drums and bands and stuff like that. And people are like, you look like you were having such a great time. And it's like, and it's not because necessarily it's fun. There was work associated with performance, but the joy in getting a chance to express yourself, and fighting is a way that we express ourselves. Fighting is a means by which we talk to other people. And it is joyful to be able to have that conversation also, especially when someone is listening and talking back, and you're having that conversation. So I'll get done in a fight with Ragnvaldr, win or lose, mostly lose, but I'll still get done in a fight with him. And I have that same joy that I had when I first started fighting, that fighting is fun. Fighting is joyful also at a certain level.
Hey guys, we got a couple of questions.
Let's
So
hit them.
Yeah,
let's
go.
go ahead and throw them out here. First question was, how do you transition from fighting in no mind to probing and gathering information?
I don't
Go ahead, please.
I was going to say I don't transition. Brannos mentioned it a little bit earlier. No mind and probing are happening, for me anyway, they're happening at the same time. I probe a lot. It's pretty much what I do, right? But there are things that I can allow to happen without conscious thought. So no mind is one of those places that's difficult for, like they say in a lot of movies, somebody dies, somebody comes back and they're like, what was it like? And they're like, well, we don't have a point of reference, so I can't tell you. Until you die, you don't know what it's like. Until you hit a no mind, you don't really know what that's like. As an example, I still remember one of the first times I felt that place. Brannos and I would have, when I was getting good enough that I was a real challenge for him, there were times where we would end up on our knees, so there's not a lot of disengage like normal. And the shots were coming so fast that they actually felt slow. What it felt like was, and I realized what I was doing was, and we're both doing it, as we threw a shot, that was no mind. We had already seen where a shot could go. We would launch that shot, and the moment we saw it, it became no mind. That shot was going to that place. Once it launched, our conscious mind went to probing. So it was probing for the next shot and what was coming from our opponent. So Brannos was doing the same thing back. He would throw shots. I had already thrown. I could now see what was coming, pick up the shot, and then look out for the next place to go to. So there was this, no mind is not paying attention. It's focusing on certain parts of the fight and allowing your skills to take place on their own subconsciously. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah, so that really just, what you're saying really is, it comes down that technique is executed thousands of times, so we do not have to think about it. And technique can also sword, your guard, which you're talking about, is technique.
Yeah.
If you have to think about I think about my shield all the time and make sure it's in the right space. But then when I'm doing other stuff, I shouldn't have to think about it to make a good block.
Right.
You
Brannos,
know, there's a simple version of this that I think a lot of people have experienced. And that is, have you ever noticed like an orange rolling off a table? You catch it out of the corner of your eye and your hand just reaches out and catches it as it falls and you don't miss. It happens so fast and you realize I didn't consciously choose to grab the orange to keep it from hitting the floor. That's a simple version of what you're talking about, Ragnvaldr. You're talking about that same level of, you call it lack of attention, but it's not really, it's that lack of conscious process thought. It happens, but it happens so fast, you really don't even have a choice about it.
Yeah.
But you're talking about a fighting form that is elaborated on that same mental process that does not involve you thinking through every aspect of what you're about to do.
So if I can just add
Go
to
ahead.
that, especially in my sort of thing, in a tournament one time and was watching and someone threw something and someone else just whipped a crazy block that was to a crazy shot and blocked a shot that was coming from way behind them.
Yeah.
And someone else said, that's the luckiest thing. And Earl Richard Rafin, may he rest in peace, great man, looked over and said, you ever noticed how the people who go to practice a lot are lucky? And it's
Exactly, brother.
so the whole point of this is that I use muscle memory a lot to kind of be my definition of no mind. And people think muscle memory is all shots, and muscle memory is that your footwork is doing the right things, that your guard is doing the right thing. Muscle memory is remembering to assess the fight and process the fight as you're going along. All that is trainable things that when you get into the moment flow. And that's when I talk about the flow of the fight, that is when everything that you've done to get to that point gets you to a point, and then all the training and technique takes over. And it can be a setup into a shot, it can actually be just a quick shot, it can be a reaction, it can be a block, it can be the correct footwork to what something else is doing. All that was trained, and you're not telling yourself, I need to do something. Something is happening because you trained to get to the point to be able to react correctly. So, I think no mind is the beautiful poetic way to say, muscle memory or trained reaction.
All right, I'm going to jump to there's a couple other questions. So let's and we really want people to ask questions. So but sorry to cut anybody off. And we are happy to talk more about that. If you want more detail on a specific piece, let us know. Do you make conscious decisions to work on something and refuse to abandon your project for practice based on tempo of the practice? I'm not quite sure what they mean by that. So I don't know if somebody wants to kind of guess what they mean by that.
Well, I think some of what they're talking about, I kind of looked at that the comment on the Facebook page is, when you go to practice, you should have a plan for what you're working on at practice, and you can have a plan for things you want to work on, but then as the night goes on and the practice evolves, I think the question is how much do you abandon what you'd originally planned on to work on something else. And I think for me that the answer to that is it kind of depends on your skill level, because some of the less advanced fighters, you kind of need to know what you're working on for an evening at practice, and you need to kind of stick with that. Because if you're working with a trainer like one of us, and we've said, hey, you got to work on your recovery, or you've got to work on your footwork, that's something that we as trainers have identified as something that is important for you to work on, and so you need to stick with that. I know for me, when I go to practice and I say, oh, I want to work on this, and I get into a particular set of fights with some of the better fighters in our group, and based on how the fight changes, I may find something throughout the course of that fight where I'm like, well, I wonder what happens when I do this, and and then I can change and I can work on some of that stuff. So I think it kind of depends on what level you are, and how much help you need, and um, yeah. So I think it's kind of fluid. So anybody else got anything on that?
I think that was well covered.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
if you want more, out there to our audience, if it didn't cover exactly what you're talking about, go ahead and answer another question. We're good there. We're gonna hit one more question just because it's out there. It's pretty straight. Tristan, a quick question for you is, I don't know if you read the chat there.
Yeah, I did
Beth?
notice that.
Okay.
Talking about Wu Wei, which is a Chinese version, and this is I can't claim to be an expert on Chinese fighting philosophy, and I don't want to misinterpret the Chinese term for that no intention, I guess, or no decision. I'm not really sure, but this does echo what I think Musashi talked about with no mind and the void. And there are several different translations of that, but what I remember him talking about was not having an agenda, not pre-planning a fight and trying to lay a blueprint down of what you're going to do, because it will, like they always say, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. Exact same principle. So you have to go in with flexibility, observance, fluidity, and the ability to watch, listen, see, and adapt. And I think that's, since combat is universal throughout all cultures, there probably are many cultures that have some sort of acknowledgement of that kind of mental flexibility and adaptability. So I guess it would be pretty close, but that's what my interpretation of the Wu Wei thing and the void would be.
So this is a great session because we're getting a lot of questions, guys, and I think that's what we're here for. So Ellen, here's one for you, okay? Since you're our guest today, and then we'll add some other folks in. Can you provide a couple of examples what you can work on at practice? I'm guessing along that lines of probing, because I did get a personal question on the other side here asking on my phone. They don't know how to make that change. I was like, okay, I'm doing stuff, but they don't know how to physically say, how do I initiate a probe, and how do I practice that at practice?
that's so. The thing is we need to try to think about probing in its most basic form, but understand that what it is. You're just gathering information. It's not an advanced technique. You can do it advanced, but it's a very basic thing. If I move towards you this way, how do you react? If I squat down a little bit, how do you react? So you should go out trying to practice and learning some techniques for probing. So you try to maybe even write them down. So I want to learn how to probe with my thrusting tip. I want to learn how to probe with my feet, moving left, right, or forward or back. But I also then need to actually, heck, it's fighter practice. Don't be afraid to say hold. Do your probe and say hold. I'm trying to process what just happened. It'll bore your opponent, but your opponent should understand that you're there to learn as well, and that's okay. But you need to be very specific at it, but don't over mystify what probing is. It's very basic stuff. It's just low risk. Remember, it should be low risk. But get a few techniques down of how you do it. I think a good one is if you got a thrusting tip on your sword, that's a good way to start probing, because it actually sounds like you're probing. Stick it out in front of you and just process the information of, if I take my thrusting tip and hold it out in front of my opponent's eyes, out of range where he can't hit me, how do they react to it? And it will tell you something. It's like, well, what did I learn from that? It all depends on whether or not you're listening, but you're learning from it. You learn, first of all, whether or not they're going to even allow it. A really good fighter will disallow that. It's like, I'm not going to let you set range like that. But if they let you do it, then what you've learned is that, well, if need be, you can just put that thrusting tip right down in their face, and they're likely to stop their charge on you because they don't want to walk into it.
I think that's a great example of one of the easiest probes that you make. And I think the key and you would agree here, is that you read it, and that you make a decision based on it, because we can do anything we want to a person, but if we're not reading our opponent and what they're giving back to us, then you're wasting time. You're wasting that effort because you're not able to process and take advantage of something. But on this one, I'm gonna just because I think this is a great subject. Actually, I love that you brought up the probing thing, and I think we don't talk
We can
about
do a whole
it enough.
episode on it.
Well, and we could, and I'm gonna do this.
It's got a lot of names too, Brannos. Duke Maximilian always called it going fishing.
Well, yes, I agree. I agree 100%. I'm going to ask some, here's a simple question so that other people, hopefully this will spur up some, and we have a bunch more questions, by the way, after this. But Ragnvaldr, give me 2 probes that you normally do immediately in a fight.
Sometimes I fool everybody by staying on mute. I will use the thrust one. I kind of chuckled to myself when he brought that up, because against, especially people who don't know me, I will often drop just simply because I'm fighting A-frame. So my hand and my sword and shield tend to be high, and I will drop down a few inches and quickly drop that thrust hand down hard. So that tip points right between the basket and the shield. And then I let it go. Now I've combined some energy with it too, to give a feeling of force behind it. And the combination usually gets some kind of response from somebody. So that's a typical one. Another typical for me is done without any sword at all. That's the way I prefer to do it. I don't like giving up my weapon to gain information. So I will typically put pressure on a person in an area and then suddenly change that pressure to a new area. That's the most common way to do it, and the simplest way I can describe it. As an example, I will start with my stance facing, so I'm in the best position to throw a shot through their center line, and then suddenly move slightly to my right and down, so they suddenly feel the pressure on that inside leg, and then just disengage. There's no commitment of my weapon. I haven't gone into range. I simply suddenly changed my threat to a new area.
And what are you looking for?
Whatever they do. So like Tristan said himself, was you don't go in with a plan. So yeah, there are certain expectations because I've done it enough. I know that if I do this, these are typical ways that people respond, but I'm not doing it to get a specific response. What I'm looking for is when I threaten that inside shield leg, what do they do? Do they charge? Do they raise their weapon to throw? Do they countershoot? Do they drop the shield? Do they, whatever they do, that's what and that's my information. So, and that goes back to what Brannos was saying. The important thing isn't that I put the pressure in one place and then in another. It was, what did I get out of that? Okay. So that's what I'm feeding off of. Now
those are perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to throw something in here too. We talked on a previous episode that Ragnvaldr does that kind of probing with his hands, and I do that kind of probing with my feet. I do it typically with range, where I'll step into a range and I'll just see how somebody responds to it. And I actually have a file, a document that I wrote about probing range specifically. So it's interesting that Al-Anon should mention that as a hallmark of his process. I will throw that file up on the Coach's Corner later today, so everybody has access to it. But it discusses exactly this, that it's, that there's no intent. Like the probe is just simply, data mining. It's just gathering information. And I've got a file written up on how to do that as an exercise. It's one of those exercises that you can do for yourself that is not really a partner drill necessarily, but it does sort of rely on having an opponent to get that feedback from and get that response from. But it's not really you do this and I do this sort of drill. So I'll put that up on the Coach's Corner tonight.
Okay.
So
go ahead.
I just want to make sure that we don't over mystify these probes. A flat snap is a probe. Yes. If you were to ask me my first thing that I do is an at range flat snap.
Yep.
90% speed. And if I kill you with it, And I actually do. I kill quite a few people with the opening flat snap shot. But it was a probe. It was all to try to understand something. And it wasn't full speed so that I can, it's close, but it's not, so that if I need to come back to it and just do the flat snap for the win, then I've got extra that I can put on it. But it also needs to be slow enough so that my opponent can react to it and tell me something. So it's a little slower than full speed, just so that I can get information. And if that information is they open themselves to something else to defend a flat snap, then that's what you're processing. They're not all mystic jukes. Sometimes they're just shots.
Yeah, I agree. I tend, mine are usually, I throw lots of jabs, right?
Yeah.
And that, so there's this, just like you, I'm throwing a jab at a level that is just, I don't want to show them all my speed right out, because it's their reading as well. But the jab, and I'll throw a jab at a range that's really at probably, maybe I couldn't kill him. I hear this all the time. Don't throw a shot if you're not going to kill him. It's like, I got bad news.
Yeah.
I throw a hell of a lot of shots that don't kill people.
I want to learn things and not get killed at the same time.
Yeah.
So
I think what
I often throw things with no intent to actually have them win, because to throw them to win is a commitment that gets you killed.
Yeah, and I threw a shot right at somebody's shield before, because you know what that is? A big on symbol. Because as soon as you hit their shield, you hit the on button, and then they run at you.
Yeah.
Right? So he's like, oh, thank you very much. That's what I hit. Just to move, you gave us an example. Sean, give me an example of like one or two of the probes real quick on that you tend to use as a staple.
So like I said, I tend to do it with my feet.
Yep.
And I'll, you put yourself, you go from just, C range to B range. But the biggest difference is not really the physical proximity, it's the intent, right? When I take that step into range, my whole intent is to find out how my opponent is going to respond to that. And one of the things I mentioned in that file is, of all the responses you can get, I mean, there's basically three things that your opponent can do, right? They can run away from you, they can throw a shot at you, or they can just stand there and block, right? Of those things, the worst possible thing that can happen to me is to have them throw a shot, right? So if I take a step in range with the intent of gathering information, and I know that the worst part of it is that they're going to shoot at me, if I know that's a possibility, then I'm prepared for that as a possibility. I'm not afraid that they're going to take a shot at me. And as you probe, you get to the point where you're like, not only am I okay with this guy shooting at me, but where do I have to be for him to feel like he has to throw a shot?
Right.
Because once I put him in a position where he feels compelled and he feels like he has to throw something, I'm in control of the fight with that.
Right.
So yeah, I tend to do it with my feet. I tend to do it with range, and I'll just go from C range to B range, and I'll just take a slide step in and then just watch, right?
Yep.
And as Alan said, sometimes you take that step in there, and the reaction that you get from your opponent is, you're just taking a very basic step in, and for some reason they decided that they're just going to block their leg, right?
Yeah.
They don't even know why, but you just take a step in without any buy-in, without any commitment to, it's like, I'm expecting this thing to happen. And that's the whole point of the probe, is there is no expectation. There is no, I'm not stepping in for the purpose of throwing a shot. I'm stepping in to find out what is available to me. And it is simply data collection. So I do it with my feet mostly.
Yep.
I can do it, I do it.
Or you do it with lots of different things, right?
Some with my hands, but honestly, I do it mostly with my feet.
You don't mind people hitting you, Sean. I hate it.
Yeah.
You actually encourage people to swing at you, because I know that you're very conscious of the fact that probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 70+% of all fights are won when you're swinging at somebody and you're not in good guard. So, that's when someone's open. When are they out of their guard? When they're swinging. Now, I personally can't stand it, because I can't stand the math associated with people hitting at me. It's like, because when people are hitting at me, well, they can kill me. And if they kill me, the fight's over. So I do everything I can to avoid launching my offense when someone else is actually trying to hit me. I'll do everything I possibly can to to thwart their offense, make them stop, and then while they stop, then I launch mine, because I just get if I'm a beat on top of it, I'm a big safer.
Yeah.
You don't
So
mind people hitting at you though. I love it.
Yeah. No, and that's a way. Sometimes that's a great way to also you get their speed and what they're doing. I totally agree. And what I'm trying to do here, guys, is this to show that there are lots of different probing mechanisms, and some people we can say it, but it doesn't mean they know what that means. And that's what I'm really trying to make sure. Tristan, you have something real short, because we do have a couple more questions. So.
Yeah, I would have to agree. Like my approach was very much like Sean's. I like using the footwork, because what I noticed over the time, most people will lose because their feet fail them. They let their feet stop and they try to deal with a fight for their hands. But I did find as I was getting more into, and this kind of covers our feints thing, I would start to use shoulder drops and shifts. So it was very low energy. I like what Ragnvaldr said about not committing your sword. When you see people start to learn probing, they're waving their sword all over the place to try to get a reaction. But as you really start flushing it out, you can make smaller and smaller motions. The probing I like the most was see how small of a motion did my opponent pick up? How jumpy, how twitchy are they? And because that's really low energy and very low risk. I like what Ailgheanan said about very low risk probing.
All right, so here's a couple questions, a couple more for you.
Hey, Brannos?
Yeah, go ahead.
If I may, before, we've been talking about probing here and trying to get people to understand what it is, because all of us have for years been doing probing consciously. And so for somebody to learn without knowing, I would suggest that for those who want to learn how to probe, one of the best places to start is start backwards. So don't go out trying to figure out, well, what moves can I do? What's a fake like, and all this stuff. You watch, go out and just do your fight like you normally do. Don't do anything different at all. And then every few seconds, and this is like in a practice setting, of course, every few seconds, stop and disengage. Because I will bet you money, everything you did, whether you stood still, you moved forward, you moved to the side, you threw a shot, you changed your shield position, whatever you did, your opponent probably responded to it. Okay, so that's essentially you probed. What makes it an actual probe is because you're consciously aware of it and you gain the information from it. But I would likely say you are already doing. You want to learn how to probe?
Yeah.
Do it backwards. Pay attention to what you're already doing. Step backwards and say, okay, he just did a thing. Why did he do the thing? What did I do before the thing? There's your lesson.
I think the question that's coming is, it's probably we can cover that. It's going to cover a few more things too, but, and I would agree with you 100%. And as a coach, sometimes you actually have to stop the person you're working with, say, okay, now tell me what they did.
Yeah, what happened?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hey, I think all of us, probably except for Rifkin, who may not have been born yet, we all started fighting in the 80s. And we probably the first 15, maybe even close to 20 years of our life, we learned about probing the old-fashioned way of just what's called hat time, helmet time. We didn't go about set to learn about probing. We just learned how to fight from the experience of fighting. What we want to do going forward is to help people get there faster by making it a part of training. Thoughtful. Why did any of this stuff happen? Stop, talk about it. Do not ever let anyone tell you that you're being geeky. This is yelling to everyone out there. Don't ever let anyone tell you that you're a stick jock and let that bother you. Yes, I'm a stick jock. I'm going to go to that fire and I'm going to talk about fighting probably for hours, and they can tell me to shut up. I'll go find a different fire where we're talking about fighting. It's perfectly cool to totally geek out on this, and it will accelerate your entire process and your fighting if you geek out on it, and if you're always thinking about what just happened and then talking about it with someone afterwards.
Well, there's a great lead into the question we had. So here's a couple of these questions run together, so we're going to cover them. So here's, obviously you're doing training at practices now. The question was, can you provide a couple of examples of what you work on at practice? Can you talk about scaling them to your practice partner in a given, I don't know what the scaling them to a practice partner in a given set. But along with that, when in coach mode, do you set up the drills or do you let the student kind of decide what they'd like to work on?
Start with Ailgheanan. He's our guest.
Oh, yeah, that's exactly. This is for him first, and then we'll pop a couple other people.
This is one of those things where I don't want to speak for anyone but me, but everyone's probably going to nod here. It depends on the student. It depends on the student. It depends on where you are as a coach, how you're going to approach each of those situations. If the student needs you to set up drills for them, you set up drills for them. If the student is able to self-manage through that, then you allow them to self-manage through that. But you need to be willing to say, hold, I got some things you need to work on. Let's talk about it, get their buy-in, and then go from there. Set it up for them, work through, teach them, run it through them enough so that they can actually, like if you miss the next fighter practice, they need to have learned enough from what you talked about at that practice that they can practice it again next week. But it depends.
Yep. Anyone else want to jump in? We're going to move on, but let's do a couple.
Yeah, I actually want to jump in with something real quick, and this is something that comes heavily from a lot of the martial arts world, and what they call, when you're working with a partner, you are the feeder. And so if you're going to teach the student A response or how to set up a particular shot, you want B, the student, the feeder, to give that response, not just wait till it happens in sparring, which it might never. For example, if you want to shoot for a lefty who steps out from behind his shield and you want to tag that leg every time, well, you need to set up, we're going to put you with a partner who's a lefty, and we're going to we're going to make a drill of this. Drill it for a few minutes, and it doesn't take like months of practice to get something like this down, but you want to set up the conditions, have them run through it, and then say, okay, now you're getting this down pretty well. Now you can take this into sparring. And but that focused drilling, having a feeder or a partner that's going to feed you the indicators and the conditions that you want to work on that particular technique, is going to be very useful.
Yeah, I'll throw something in here too. I think part of that too, regarding whether or not you let the student decide how they're going to be taught. There's a lot of our sport where you don't know what you don't know. And our job as coaches and trainers is to identify the deficiencies and help people along the path and find the solutions to those things. So, we always talk about expecting the student to empty the cup, and come to us with, come to us with an open mind about what we're going to do. Yeah, and it's our job to lead them to some extent, but at the same time, the student is providing us that information. We'll do 3 or 4 fights with the student. That's all the information I need to put somebody on their way. But as Al-Anon said, you have to have done some work with what I gave you last time. We've all been through this where you get somebody who goes, hey, can you help me with my fighting? And I'm like, yeah, sure. Everybody gets that freebie. Everybody gets that one time where I'll give you the whole, I'll feed you from a fire hose. Right. But if you come to me 6 months later and you ask for my help again, and you didn't do anything with the information that I gave you before, that gets old for me fast. And it's not, and the thing I tell people is it's not that you're wasting my time, you're wasting your time. Right. But if you go try what I gave you and it didn't work, that's totally different, right? I will find something that works for you, or I will find somebody who will find something that works for you. As long as you're putting in that effort, then I'm a big believer that the effort is the single largest indicator of success in our sport. And if you're working at this and you're genuinely trying to be a better fighter about this, you're going to get better and you're going to find the information that you need. So, yeah, sometimes, if you don't feel like you're making progress, well, first off, I can see progress that you can't see. But if you don't feel like you're making progress, as long as you're putting in the work, I know that work pays off. So I will have a lot more patience with that. But it's very easy to tell when somebody's put the work in and when they haven't.
All right. So I think we covered a lot of that. Somebody actually asked a good question, and I'd kind of like to hear the answer from Al-Anon as well. And that is, could you discuss how to develop a good guard and what you place importance on when developing it, i.e. super defensive, right, ready for anything, that kind of stuff.
So I can't remember if this was part of our pre-discussion or if I said it during this, but my definition of a guard is the most defense you can get out of your shield and weapon, or weapon and weapon, the most defense, because that's the most important part out of this guard, that then allows you to do at least 80% or more of your shots. So, hiding behind your shield could be a good guard, but you can't throw any shots from there. So you always have to factor in, can you do your offense? And then is your guard at lay on? At lay on, does your guard cover the most of you? So you start from that kind of perspective, and then you start to build on it, and then you got to get help, and you have to understand that guards move. As we move, they move, and as you throw shots, they move. So when I'm extended into the shot, I still am in guard. It's just an exposed guard. So, and then if I come back from that guard, but my hand kind of half comes back or goes back behind me when it was supposed to be an A-frame, then I'm doing the guard incorrectly. So you got to have partners. You got to have people who are helping you. If you don't have trainers, then you have partners in your own training. And you have to have a partner in this, because someone's got to have eyes on you to say, you're dropping your guard, or some people will hold their guard way too much when they're not in range. And that's a bad technique too, because then you're putting pressure on yourself when you don't need to. There's a number of things here, and I think we should hit a couple different ways that we can talk about this guard thing. And I picked up a lot of my guard stuff from working with both Brannos and Ragnvaldr. I fight in an A-frame. I don't do it well, but I fight in an A-frame. People are like, no, you don't. You're standing up straight. You're doing crazy stuff with your hands. You're all over the place. And it's like, yeah, but have you ever noticed I do that crap out of range? When someone's in range to hit me, I drop my knees. I bring my hand where it needs to be, and I am in a pretty darn good, not a great, but a pretty darn good A-frame defensive position and offensive position. Yeah, I do crazy stuff like this at range, way outside of range, but this circles back. The reason why I want to address this question is because my idea for a kind of a show that we could do here and work with anyone who might like to work with it is, pick a different night than Coach's Corner night, but I want to do a check your guard show. I want people to either on their video or to have their spouses or significant others or whomever they're sheltering with, take a picture of them in their guard, both from the front and from the sides, and then let us coach them through that. Because I've spent entire classes at collegiums and stuff just working with people on their guards. And one time, most of it is just like, man, I wish you could see what I could see. That's the first step to fixing your guard, is actually seeing your guard from your opponent's perspective. Long-winded way of saying, answering a question a little bit about the guard, and then also trying to pitch a new program.
Nothing wrong with that. We'd love to have you anytime. So
we could definitely make that happen.
So anybody else want to talk about, the fundamental idea of guard being the kind of one of the, Sean, you should absolutely talk about this because that's the core of what you have.
Yeah. Right? And one of the things about my guard, it's a couple of things. First off, Alan, I kind of alluded to it on a couple of different points there. When you throw your shot, and then your hand has to come back to your starting point, right? That's the recovery, offensive recovery, right? And offensive recovery, in my mind, is the single greatest failing in our sport. It is the one thing that people fail to do most frequently. They'll throw a shot out there, and then everything else after that, they're trying to get to something faster, and they don't complete that recovery. So that's a pretty key point of what you're saying is, that's part of that guard is getting back to the guard and getting that completing that recovery. So my guard is one of my core philosophies about where my guard is that like Ellen had said, I'm perfectly comfortable with people firing at me, especially having a slightly smaller shield. I'm okay with people actually taking a shot at me because it's that allows me to respond offensively to what they're doing. And I don't counter punch nearly as much as Brian does. But there's probably some of that I got from my night as well. But my guard is basically my defensive guard is in a position where, like Ellen said, yeah, you can put your shield up and you can cover your head, but that's a purely defensive mindset, and it doesn't allow for you to have the 80+% of your offense that you need. So the thing about, sword and board fighting in our sport is, it's a totally modern, concept for our modern martial art, where, sword and shield is the default standard, but it's because the sword and the shield give you the best balance of offense and defense, especially considering the magic shield concept that we're working with, right? Where if it touches my shield, it couldn't possibly do any damage behind my shield, right? So sword and board gives you the best balance of offense and defense. For me, I want my shield in a position where, rather than covering all of one thing, I'm going to expose a little bit of everything. And so part of that is there's a couple of things. First off, from there, it is a shorter distance to all of my blocks, rather than a longer distance from one block to from the one I want to cover. If I want to cover all of my head, it's a longer block down to my leg. Also, to some extent, that gives my opponent an embarrassment of riches regarding their targeting opportunities, right? If they see a little bit of everything, they're like, I can kind of get to the leg, I can kind of get to the arm, I can kind of get to the head, but you don't have a definite shot at any one of those things. And this also kind of comes from a perspective of understanding your exposure, which is something also that Al-Anon had talked about early on, with that guard, is you got to understand your guard, you got to understand your opponent's guard, you have to understand defensively in your guard, what does your opponent see? Not just, can I, how much of everything can I block, but what does your opponent see? And so that's part of me exposing a little bit of everything, is knowing that, yeah, you could probably get to a flat snap, but if I know that you can get to a flat snap, then then I know that I'm prepared to block that. One of the things this gives me is, especially again with a smaller shield, when I'm in my typical guard and I pick up on the fact that somebody has seen a target and that they want something, I will feed that to them. Because when they take a look down at my leg and they're like, I bet I can get that leg, I'm like, by all means, I bet you can.
Yep. So you're setting a trap, right? So
right, because really part of guard and part of blow recognition of what's coming at you, when you're accounting for blows that are coming at you, there are basically two variables that we need to account for, and that's when and where. And typically your opponent is going to provide you one of those variables, and it is entirely possible for you to dictate the other of those variables. So if, like I said, if somebody takes a look at that leg and they think they can get that leg, yeah, I'll expose that more. And then usually when that happens, if they've given me enough indication that they want a particular shot and I feed that to them, usually what happens is there's this certain glow that comes over them where they're like, hey, I think I can get that leg. Oh, now I can really get that leg. And they just, it's funny. You can see them beaming about, oh, well, now I get the thing that I really want. I'm like, yes, you certainly do. And now I know exactly where they're going, and they're probably going to tell me when. So that's kind of the core of my guard, is just exposing a little bit of everything.
All right. So let's see. I think we caught up on all our questions, which is great. So back to you, Al-Anon. We're gonna now the hard. We get another one. Okay. What are the views on repackaging coaching versus fostering strength coaching? Not quite sure what that means. Anybody got an idea?
Yeah, I've not heard the repackaging coaching term, but with fostering strengths, that rings a bell of people of training to a certain athlete's particular traits of strength. Like you want to enhance the two or three things they do really well. You want to have them do it really super well, as opposed to saying, all right, we're going to take the 8 or 9 things you don't do well, and we're going to build all those up to build like a generalist versus a specialist. And
yeah, I think that might be what they're talking about repackaging. I think the idea is, hey, we're going to work on this stuff,
right?
And we're going to, essentially, you're going to do this if you're good at it or not, or hey, I'm going to evaluate the individual, and then if he's going some different way, I'm going to try to strengthen up what he has.
You know what this sounds like is an issue I went through as a trainer several years ago, where I'm reading his words, listening to you guys, and trying to figure out the definition. And the one that comes to mind for me is a repackaging coach was what I was doing several years ago. I would get frustrated, like at our TOCs, I was like, I'm teaching the same crap to everybody over and over because everybody's feet are wrong, or everybody's stance is wrong. They're just not doing it right. And I realized after a while that the problem, the consistency there, was me. I was trying to make everybody else fight the way I thought people were supposed to fight. So I was, in this person's term, as I interpret it, repackaging them to be the way I thought people were supposed to fight. And I learned that that's wrong for a number of reasons. So for me, the second way, building somebody's strengths, is an infinitely more useful and better use of my time and a student's time than trying to repackage them. The only person I might try to repackage, and even then I don't really do it as much, is, you know what, I don't do it. I was going to say with students, because there you want them to fight your way, but I'm still building on their strengths. So I find more people, like when we've gone to teach in other kingdoms, they don't fight A-frame. They don't fight like we do. So I have found I will show them A-frame, but with a different frame of mind. Here's A-frame. Not to get you to do it, but to say, hey, here's a thing you're not used to. This is what it is. Throw that in your toolbox. Now, this is how you guys fight. Here's how you can apply what I'm doing to how you guys, what your guard is, what your stance is, what your techniques are, what your weapon preferences are, and build on their strengths. It's a much more useful way to teach someone.
Yeah, I think the key in a lot of this is, like, I'm not going to go to Tristan's martial arts class and say, hey, Tristan, can you show me Kung Fu when he's teaching Aikido?
Right.
So we do get a little bit of that, right?
Got to go to Euler for that.
That's right. So there is, when you go to a practice, the people at that practice usually have a base they build on. And then they're totally, in a lot of ways, they're much different from each other based on the physical abilities, mental abilities that they have. And that's where the change occurs. That's where we have to foster the strengths of the differences. But if a brand new person comes in, you're going to build a base, and not only are you going to build that base, they're going to see that base in everybody else. And so I think it's I see people like this all the time come to our practice. They'll come from other kingdoms and they're just moved in, and I let them, and I try to help them understand what they're doing better, and try to help them build stuff into their shots. I'll even call people and say, hey, I got somebody from your kingdom. Tell me what I need to do, and try to work with them at some point. And then I'll also tell them, here's what I am doing to break you down based on your style, so that he knows what his weaknesses are. And then it's always their choice of what they want to do after. How about Alan? Do you run the process?
So yeah, and some of it is regular trainer versus guest trainer, because what you can do as a guest trainer is just hit the highlights. All you're really doing is, because you're not going to have the weekly opportunity to reinforce, any methodology or anything that they need, so it's really hard to be a guest trainer. As a guest trainer, you're really just hitting very high level things and hoping something connects. And some people will reach back out to you to say, hey, that really connected with me. What can I do on this, this, and this? And you might actually engage them, for the rest of their lives at that point. But when I'm guest training, kind of like what we were talking about today, I'm hitting the high points and seeing if anything resonates, and then I'm going home. And if they reach back out, great. But at our practice, at the practices that you're regularly going to in your kingdom, any of the things where you have actual repetition, then you can actually really think about, well, what does this student need, or what does this person need? And you can try to do something. But when I went to Trimaris last fall for Duke U, someone said, what should I do? And I'm like, wow, man, what do I tell you? because I'm not going to be here next week to reinforce it. Well, here's some basics again. I'm going to tell you some more basics of stuff that you can be thinking about, but it's really hard to hit someone with the guest trainer perspective and make something really stick beyond a large concept. You don't get to work these smaller things over and over and over again. I mean, Tristan, when you go somewhere and guest at a dojo, I mean, and then you leave, how much more interaction do you have with those people?
Literally zero or near zero. No, it's tough.
Yeah, Eleanor, that's kind of why I wanted to bring you on and have this conversation, is because I've worked with quite a few people in Aidenville, curiously enough, that happen to go to the practice that you're at. And everybody that I've talked to that I've worked with in Aidenville, yours is the name that keeps coming up as, well, I've got Alan on to work with. And like you said, as you know, as somebody that comes in, maybe, you know, I'll have some interaction with some of these people maybe once a year. And you know, when I get the time to work with them, they're all great students. And, you know, and I always have to follow that up with, this is something you should be able to work with Ellen on, or with Morgan on. And you guys are pretty fortunate there in Twin Moons to have I think you guys have a training oriented practice rather than a fighting oriented practice. And I think you've been
It's a good mix.
I think you've been a good
Morgan's been so
regard.
good at helping it stay focused on training and fighting, because you don't want to get hit by the dude, and so you've actually got to learn how to not get hit by the dude. So that's so really funny, because I actually had to take one of the guys you were helping and say, Sean's not telling you wrong, but you gotta stop doing it. He's not here to help you.
Right.
You know, and that Zipster came back from one of your things, and he was trying to do stuff, but it didn't connect well enough that he was able to do repetition with it. And he was like, well, Sean said to do this. And I'm like, I don't care what Sean said. Sean's not here to tell you to do it again. So I need you to stop. You're getting very frustrated because you don't have the reinforcement that comes with training.
Right. And that's the thing, is I can expose him to the concept.
But he was trying to do it.
Yeah. And I can expose him to the concept, but having a trainer like you there to take that concept and fit it to, you know, what he actually does on a weekly basis.
That's the trouble with being a guest trainer.
Yep.
I think the big piece on that is some people come back and they're like, okay, this is absolutely the way I have to do it. And that's not the key. The hard part for students is what to grab, you know, what to hold on, but really understanding how it flows in with their style. You know, Sean's not saying, hey, you have to change everything. Sean's saying, you understand this concept. And if you can merge that concept into what you're doing now, then you have something better, even if it's one step better. Right. And I think that's a big part of that. Hey, we got another question, and this is a good one. So how do you condition yourself from relying on muscle memory to patterns to develop more fluid style?
I don't. I mean, it's how you define muscle memory, right? You know, to me, muscle memory is the fluid style. That is the flow of the fight. You've done testing, you're continually testing, you're probing, you're doing analysis, you're taking the data, all the input of the data, and you're processing it, and you're just trying and putting yourself in different positions. But the kill shot's muscle memory. The kill shot is that thing you've learned over and over and over again. You just have to think of the different way to apply it, and you know, because every situation might have a different way to apply it. I think it's all that you've trained yourself for those things, and then the flow it's all happening circularly and fluidly. It's going back and forth. But I think how do you ever train yourself from learning these cool the muscle memory shots, the muscle memory moves, I think that's what you're supposed to be doing. You're training to it, not away from it.
Well, and I guess that's the key is this comes again back down to, there are things that should absolutely be muscle memory. And sometimes you have to break that muscle memory down to make sure your shot is right. So I practice 1,000 Pell shots a day. Oh, but I threw the shot wrong 1,000 times a day.
Yeah.
And what do you have? You have a bad shot, right? So now you have to change that muscle memory. But
And good
I
luck
agree.
getting that in with the timing of an opponent who's
Yeah,
willing
well,
to defend and hit you back.
yes, exactly. But there's accuracy as muscle memory and things like that. And I think, for me, some of that muscle memory is like, let me just help you throw what is a perfect drop leg shot. Right?
Yeah,
Let me help
technique.
you throw the perfect inside snap. And now we're gonna now once you have that, we're gonna change it. You're gonna walk and throw that perfect snap. And you're gonna, so we're learning that to throw it away later. In other words, we're learning because they're like thinking, okay, I got to do this and this. I have to twist my foot. I got to turn my hip. I got to let go of my fingers. I got a million things learning all the way too. And at the end, what do they remember? When I throw that shot, it just acts, right? We're analyzing, we're breaking somebody down, and that's where I'm going to hit them. Do you think about your foot? Do you think about your hip? No, because that's all technique, and that is delivered without thought. Right? So I think you're 100% right. You don't, there's things that we want to create in muscle memory, but the idea of just, you don't throw, muscle memory is created, you don't throw it away to create flow. The flow is created, that's another, really, in some ways, it becomes a muscle memory for some people. And some people, like, if that flow breaks, then they have to think about it and get back into that flow.
I think we can use the flow to purposefully put ourselves in position to let the muscle memory take over.
Exactly.
And then over the course of time, you're able to apply the muscle memory differently. That doesn't mean you've got two different ways to throw the same shot. You've got one way to throw the same shot, but your brain allows you to put the shot in different places.
Yeah, that's something that Sagan often refers to as the onboard computer, right? And fighter practice is where you are writing the code for your onboard computer. That's where you are running your subroutines to failure. That's where you're running all these programs to find out, these different situations where, things, under what circumstances do certain things work. And that's what we have practice for, and that's what we need to use practice for, is to program that onboard computer so that when you get into a tournament, you just execute the program and it runs. And I like what Alan was saying about, it's the same mechanic. I mean, that's why when I teach baseline mechanics, right? I teach one basic flat snap, and then you put yourself in a position to have better access to that using either footwork or however you're going to get there. But it's all on a baseline, and like you said, it's the same thing. It's just being able to use it under different circumstances and being able to get from, and there's a certain creativity, I think, that is necessary to do that, to be able to visualize, that I can get to, I can use the same mechanic to get to a different place with that.
I think that goes back to what he's talking about with guard. Would that be correct, Alanon? You're talking
Absolutely.
about part of your guard. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because at first I did not understand why you want to put that first, because you were always like defense. And the last thing I want to do is be simply prepared to defend myself. To me, that's a bad place to start. But that's what I'm understanding as you describe it. When you say guard, you don't mean your first instinct is I'm prepared to block anything.
No, I'm prepared to fight.
Exactly. So your guard is simply one of our common words for stance, mental state, awareness of what's going on, is all part of that guide, our guard. Does that sound like I'm interpreting it correctly, Alan?
No, that's 100% it. And that's why it's so important. If it was just your defensive mindset, it would just be a thing, but it is from which everything else happens, including the offense, especially the offense. If you throw your offense at a bad guard, you're not going to survive that encounter against a good fighter.
Right.
So yes,
that helps clarify it.
All right.
Cool. So do we have another question, Brannos?
We do, but you can go ahead. Just make it short.
Well, I had so I have a question for Alanon.
Okay.
That's very specific to Alanon. So I'm going to jump in here, and it's been bugging me because it's over his shoulder. You want to tell us a little bit about why you use the shield you use?
I use a center grip shield because it allows me to manipulate range better than I was ever able to with a strap shield. The shield that I specifically use, let me see if I can.
Yeah, that figure eight, or I'm not
Peanut.
sure what you call it, but it's like a
So
very.
It's the
You don't
peanut.
actually use that much anymore, do you?
I still do go back and forth. So I always just called it a peanut shield, and His Grace Maximilian from Meridies, who is much more of a student of history, couldn't stand that term, and he now he's kind of put it as a little bit of muscle memory in my head that I'll call it a exaggerated Battersea shield. So I think the most important parts are the center grip, and for me, the slightly off center part of the center grip. I'm slightly north of the center. If you can see my hand here, if you actually drew the line in the center, I'm an inch north of that. That kind of puts it more in the whole way it hangs, like a kite shield or something else. The gravity is kind of forcing it down. It's something I saw His Majesty Uther of the West do with his oval shields. He was slightly north of center. I saw him with a couple of his shields, and it just really does. It keeps the shield wanting to go north and south more than if it was really balanced in the middle, where it starts to rotate back and forth a little bit. Now, I get nothing from these cutouts.
Okay.
I love the aesthetic. I get nothing, and occasionally I get hit in the arm. That's what I get from these damn things. So like, you'll see that arm flash there a little bit, and a really good opponent will start going, hey, I see a little arm there. I'm going to start working, and they start working me over here. And then suddenly I get wrapped in the arm, and I'm like, oh man, it's stupid cutout.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much for those hits.
You're welcome.
So I don't get very much from the cutouts other than the fact I like the aesthetic. I
think that's a cool reason.
Historically, there's no precedent for this much of an exaggeration in a Battersea shield. The actual Battersea shield has it's got this slight sort of curve in here, but it certainly doesn't go into that Mr. Peanut form. And also the Battersea shield was maybe only about this tall, so it's probably a parade shield.
We can't see your other hand. Can you show us a different?
Sorry. So
that's okay.
So the real Battersea shield probably was only like this from here to here.
Oh, okay.
And again, the cutout, it was more of a slight indention. So even though we call this a Battersea shield or exaggerated Battersea shield, just so that my friends don't beat me up for calling it a peanut shield, it's an aesthetic.
Thank you for that, Alan.
It's the look.
You explaining that.
All right, guys. Just so you know, we're kind of rolling up on the about an hour and 25 minutes. We'd like to try to keep these down to about an hour and 30. There was a question out here that I think I'm not quite sure if we'll have as much time to talk about it, but at least Al-Anon can throw what he thinks about it out there. And if we get a lot more questions, I'm sure we can probably run over just a little bit. I don't want to make the show way long, and really, I bet you Al-Anon, if we all plead and beg like we had to this time to get the great Al-Anon on, he'd come back.
Mm.
And like we've said before, ask us questions. Send them to us directly.
Yeah.
Post them on Coach's Corner where everybody can benefit from them. Questions are fantastic for us.
So the question for you is, what's your favorite drill? In other words, what is that? Either your personal favorite or the favorite drill that maybe the first drill you worked with somebody.
So this will really expose me for the crap trainer that I am. I don't have a favorite drill because I probably don't use drills nearly enough to engage my students. I'm so hyper focused on trying to get them into the conversation of the fight that I really just want to see them fight. I want to say hold. So if it's the drill, if there's a drill at all, I'm a very interactive martial trainer when I'm working with the two fighters or a group of fighters. I will stop, I'll call hold, and I'll ask one person to tell me what happened. And then I'll ask the other person to tell me what happened if I feel like we can get some feedback from that. And I will bring people to the field. It's like, I want you to stand where I'm standing because I want you to see what I'm seeing. And I want you to be able to talk about it as we go. So I feel like there's value into just constantly talking about what's actually happening in the fight. So from a standpoint of this is a footwork drill, or this is a shot drill on the pale, or this is a defensive drill, or a mostly offensive drill between opponents, I absolutely utilize them some, but not nearly as much as I'll call a hold right in the middle of a pass and say, what just happened? But you know what? I train melee like that too. Right in the middle of, they're all having such a great time or whatever, I'll scream hold and say, we needs to talk about what we're doing here. You're going to forget once we're done and we go back under that tree. So hold, why is everybody doing what they're doing? So I'll pull that straight back with two people and say, hold, what are we doing and what's going on here, so that I can get them up to speed as quickly as I can on the same terminology, the same thought process, the same sort of methodology of, well, were you thinking about your guard at any of this point? Were you thinking about the pace of this fight at any of this point? Were you conscious of the range? At any point did we talk? Did you stop and think about these things? And what are you doing to get more information? So
it sounds like what you're doing is you're using your probing ability and skill as a teaching tool.
That's correct. Thank you for pulling that significantly more succinctly than I was able to.
I like that. We use that method a lot. If I describe the way I like to do it is, as far as a drill goes, I like to look at, when you are sparring at practice, understand that it's practice. So everything that goes into a fight, and you eliminate parts of it until you're down to just whatever it is you want to work on. Sometimes that means you can still fight with some limited parameters, or sometimes you bring it all the way down to literally, I'm going to stand here and you throw the shot at me. I am just a dummy pal for you to throw at. So if I had to pick a favorite one, for me, it's what we call a one-shot drill. So what you do is you fight, you spar just like you normally would, and any kind of feints, probing, that kind of thing does not count. Those test shots, where you kind of whip out and whack a basket hilt or that kind of thing, those shots don't count. When you're throwing to wound or kill someone. And when you do that, you get one. Yeah. And if it fails, you lost the fight. So now you have to stop and say, oh, I lost. And what I find it makes people aware of is how often, because you've talked and it's been corroborated by everybody else here, the most dangerous position you're in is throwing a shot. And if you're not aware of why you're throwing a shot, you are in a bad place. And if you throw that more, you're in a bad place even more frequently. So what the one-shot drill I find does is makes people aware of how many times they're throwing shots that have no purpose or have low odds. Like you said right at the gate, Alan, we don't play for low odds. We get all this information so we can invest safely. Right?
Some jackass probably just told them they need to throw more shots.
And like you said before, they got to be more aggressive. What is aggressive? Brannos I think would confirm, when I fight, I'm pretty aggressive, but I don't throw much at all. I am constantly putting pressure and pushing somebody with that and trying to always keep them off balance. So they feel like they should feel agitated if I'm doing it right. But I'm not throwing shots, right? So you feel, well, all right, it's working. So for me anyway, that's one. Sean, what have you got for a favorite drill?
Well, we did an episode on the Coach's Corner 2 weeks ago on drills. Me and Ragnvaldr Sagan. So that's up on the Coach's Corner. It's up on the YouTube channel we have for Coach's Corner as well.
Good
But
one.
probably the most effective drill I have is the 2 second drill. And that's one that's it's a drill that addresses recovery. Because again, that's my soapbox. That's the thing I see is the most common thing that people fail at. And so it's a recovery drill that forces you to get your stick back to your shoulder or wherever you're starting from, and to get that back. And it's about the frequency of blows, right? So you're going to throw the trainee is going to throw a series of 15 blows, and it's going to be at least once every 2 seconds, but not more than twice in 1 second. And so the first part of that, at least once every 2 seconds, that addresses the newer fighters who don't think that they have a target and they need, this giant target zone that doesn't exist. And they're not going to fire until they see something like that big. So getting them to fire more frequently at less perfect targets, the more you throw at the less perfect target, the smaller your target zone becomes. But it was really created for a guy who went into it asked me for some help, and goes into this tournament, he's just throwing just a ton of combos, and just and that's the thing with being more aggressive, right? That aggression is just more lead down range, right? You're just throwing out more stuff hoping that something is going to get through, rather than taking the time to identify targets. And again, we keep getting back to the same thing, but it's a decision making process. When you make better decisions about the blows you're throwing, the shots that the resources that you need to deliver a blow are inherently available, where they're not when you're trying to make something happen. And so this forces that more experienced fighter who wants to throw those combos, it forces them to take that time to recover, and to identify targets. And so that's the not more than twice in 1 second. And I know, Rifkin's sitting here nodding her head, and she hasn't really had anything to say, but I know that's a drill that her and Vilius use quite a bit. And she can probably give some insight on how effective that's been for them.
All right, make her talk.
Take yourself off mute, Sir Rifkin.
Okay, does that work?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, we've actually taken Duke Sean's drill and we've made it into more than just recovery. Like, I'll use it, like I was saying when you guys were talking about checking your guard. We'll use it to check our guard if you're the one not throwing, because you know where you're open by where your opponent is choosing to throw. So we've taken that drill and probably done like 4 different manipulations to work on different things. It's an awesome drill. You should look it up. It's on YouTube. He has a great handout. It's awesome.
Nice. Very
Great.
nice. Tristan,
right.
do you have drills
Go
that you
ahead.
find work for both SCA and the Aikido?
Yes, I do. As a matter of fact, and it's often referred to as flow drilling. And this is
Flow?
flow drill.
Okay.
And it's commonly used in things like grappling, which are very high energy arts that are exhausting if you go at 100% of your intensity. And I think that SCA fighting at full speed, full intensity is very high energy. You got the armor on, you're moving fast, you're hitting pretty hard. And this is a subject that comes up within the training world within martial arts of how do you take, especially people that are older, 35 plus, 40 plus years old, and expose them to high energy grappling with a 22-year-old, because you're going to burn out their energy in a matter of minutes. And now you can't learn anything. And this flow drill is, imagine going at 60% from an SCA context. Imagine going 60% of your speed, hitting lightly, but using all the exact body mechanics that you should be using to execute your shots, execute your blocks, your movements. But you're not delivering the speed or the power, but you're using it as an analysis to figure out, watching how an opponent moves, watching how swords move, watching how you interact, how you control range. All of the variables are there except for the high intensity, high speed. And the Russian athletes, the boxers, the wrestlers, the MMA fighters have found they can train like that for 6-8 hours a day, rather than burn themselves up in 45 minutes and then have to rest the rest of the day, because their training is useless when you're exhausted. So what'll happen is, over 6 months a year, 2 years, you get an athlete that's trained 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, versus an athlete that trained 2 hours a week because he got exhausted. And the athlete that trains hard and fast for a short amount of time doesn't get the same absorption time of the one that does the flow drills, goes smoothly, is not there cranking their joints, getting exhausted. There's a time and a place for that high energy, what we would call sparring, but it's not a major part of the practice. And they do this in the Philippines with Thai boxing.
Thai boxing, yep.
It's mostly about flow and movement. That's where they spend most of the bulk of their training time. And I think the SCA could really benefit from expanding the flow time to figure out the timing, figure out the body mechanic movement, all the stuff that just zips by when you're going full speed.
Hey, Tristan,
So,
you know what
so
that
it
sounds
drops
like?
speed as well as energy then.
Right.
The speed and the energy both drop down to about 60%.
Yeah.
That
And
reminds
you can
me
go
of
40% if you get like good control, but that takes a really good martial artist to go really slow.
So that reminds me of the guys that have come to the SCA from the foam fighting world. You know, people are like, well, I kind of thought they might suck. And it's like, nah, they're really good. You know why? Because they go to their events and they fight from Friday to when they get there till 1 a.m.
Yeah.
And then they get up the next day and fight all day to 1 a.m. And then they might fight a little bit before they get back in their car and go home, because it doesn't hurt and they don't have to have the same amount of recovery time.
Right.
You know?
That helm time hours is a huge deal.
Just learning how to process the speed of things.
Yeah. And that's the one thing that when I was doing the rapier fighting back in the day, because those rapiers fly fast. When your eye gets used to that much speed, and then you see a slower fighter, which is, heavy stick, boy, everything seems like it's slowing down. So there's different environments you can put yourself in to adjust to them. But generally, the more time you see those sticks flowing around and how you're moving and stuff, especially when your brain isn't panicked about suddenly becoming in pain, where you're terrified of getting that, Brannos ass wrap that's going to have you not sitting down comfortably for 3 days. You remove that and you make it so that the brain can absorb more. So that would be my drill, is a flow drill type approach.
Yeah. And actually, to tell you the truth, just real quick one before I hand it off to Sean here, because he's dying to ask a question, and then we'll wrap it up. On that point, actually, we do drills like that. We take it down. Strikes don't matter. Anything else, it's just try to be in the flow. Try to control your energy. Try to have complete control over yourself, and look to execute techniques. And it does. It allows you to move beyond 2 minutes of fighting, 30 minutes of sitting down.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, Sean, all you.
All right, so Your Grace, Elenon, after I saw your interview with Rifkin, which was brilliant, I have a ton of questions, honestly, that things that came up there that I'd like to talk to you more about. But there's one in particular that I want to hit you up on, that kind of talks about that humility thing that you claim to have a problem with, which I get. But you talked about, I'll look at those other things when I'm done being the best damn fighter the SCA has ever seen. And then you ended the whole thing by saying that you want to be the best fighter in the world, and you're not there yet. Which I think a vast majority of the people throughout the SCA would disagree with. You were definitely a world-class fighter. But the question is, how do you define success? How do you, I've got my own thoughts on this, of course, and I wanted to hear from everybody else on this, but we don't define success by wins and losses. None of us have for a long, long time. I had mentioned in one of our conversations early on in the Coach's Corner that, there's an old saying that rich people don't worry about money because they have it, and legendary fighters don't worry about wins and losses because we have it. So it's not wins and losses. How do you define success?
So I think it's critical to almost everyone here who's really tried to be successful, whatever our definition of success is. It's about being true to your training. And it's about being true to the hours of practice that you've put in and what you were trying to accomplish from those hours of practice. I walk away from a fight satisfied and feeling like it was a successful fight if my guard was in a pretty good shape the whole time, if I was aware of and managed range to the best of my ability and the best of my training, if I was conscious of the pace of the fight, if I was conscious of the fact of whether or not my opponent was trying to put pressure on me, and whether or not if I attempted to put pressure on them and did it successfully. And if throughout that fight, I was constantly reassessing and analyzing all the data that I got from my probes. If I do all of those things and basically stay true to training, then I was successful. And if I go through the tournament and I do those things, at the end of the day, I consider that being successful. If I have a fraction of a second of a lapse in thinking about any of those things and I get struck, it's not that I lost the fight. It's that I wasn't true to the training and the effort. I wasted the amount of effort that I put into it for a momentary lapse of thinking and discipline, a lack of discipline. So I have been in fights with everyone here before in tourney settings. I haven't got a chance to fight you in tourney, Sean, but I've fought the other guys in tourney settings, and I have won and I have lost. And I have almost mostly been satisfied because I was true to everything that I was trying to do. It wasn't, the winning is a byproduct of that training. And it's a byproduct of being true to the training, being honest with yourself and having an honest assessment of your performance and whether or not you were there. So I have delivered the last blow against some of these fine fighters, and I have been on the receiving end of the last blow of a fight from these fighters. And as long as I worked hard and stayed true and stayed focused on all the things that got me to that point, that's what I consider to be successful. I've won 6 crowns. To be honest, we all know this. That's not a big deal. Crown is not actually the hardest tournament. It might be the most psychologically interesting tournaments that we get a chance to be a part of, but they're not the hardest tournaments. And they're not the hardest test. The hardest test is fighting against another fighter who does something really well and really excellent and is staying true to their training, which might somehow break your own discipline. Those are the tests. And that's how I measure success. You get wins from that because I really work hard to be successful at those things. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking more of a, on a career scale. You know, when you talk about some of the best fighters in the world, I mean, you are what I refer to as world class. Anywhere you go, you are going to compete. You're not necessarily going to win every fight that you have, but everywhere you go, you are going to compete. And you know, when you said at the end that that you don't think you're there, I get that. I get that to a large extent, because there's a part of us that, as much as we want to be there, the moment that we think that I'm the best fighter in the world,
yeah,
that's when the wheels come off. That's when everything falls apart.
So I'm not there because I don't train hard enough, and I'm not there because a legacy of being a great fighter and / trainer. Because if I'm going to be the best fighter in the SCA, I'm also going to be able to leave people who can do the things that I did and can fight, and with the philosophies and the methodologies that I've got from all the people here. There's a wake. You can cut through all the fighting and win like all get out. Your wake has to do with whether or not you're able to teach people along the way. And if you're able to you can watch someone fight. People can watch me fight, but they're not going to be tall, and they're not going to be naturally fast. They're not going to have weird basketball influences that I have, and they're not going to be able to play punk rock drums, which is typically, it's where I first got my hand speed from being, you have to train yourself to be able to throw shots from here. But I kind of came into it naturally because I played drums from here, and I played really hard and really fast. So I had these natural things. that got me to a point to where I was moderately successful. It's only been when I can repeat the behaviors that I got from training and repeat the things that I learned from better fighters and better trainers than me and apply them to myself that I felt like I've become even vaguely successful. And the goal to be the best, I believe, is unattainable, but I want to be the best anyway.
Amen. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. Well, since Brannos is up, let's have you. How do you measure success?
You know, and I think we're kind of running a bit on the long side here, but I'd actually like to, you know, I'll give you a short one. And there's so many places. I mean, you know, we're just talking about, you know, notes, people taking notes and things like that here. There's so much good stuff here. I'd love to have Ellen on back and talk more about this. There's Ragnvaldr showing off all his notes and so, you know, for the folks that people, yeah, exactly. Everyone's showing off their notes. For the people at home, this is, I mean, really, I mean, we sit around and still do this. This is the geekery we're talking about. Al-Anon's talking about here. This is the thing that he's like, we talk fighting all the time because we actually love it. Right? My poor wife has to sit and listen to me all the time. I feel so bad for her. But she's a saint, so I'm a lucky man. But you know, I think defining success, I wish I did it better because, and it's actually something me and Ragnvaldr both talk about. Because we're in search of perfection, there's never success. But you can't dwell on, because we actually, Ragnvaldr ran into this problem. You can't dwell on the negativity all the time. In other words, you can't dwell on, you know, Ragnvaldr wins Candlemas. He can tell you the 3 people that hit him and where and how they did it. Right? He can't tell you who he probably even fought in the finals. You know, it's not the win that matters, right? It's those the weaknesses that we have to work out of ourselves, that perfection that we're trying to seek. And that can lead you in some bad places. You also have to remind yourself on that you are doing good, that you are competing on that level, and that your friends are all there and helping you along the way, and you get to help them. That's, you know, that's the even better part of all of this. We worked through Ragnvaldr's by every time after a practice was done, instead of him complaining to me about all the shit he did wrong, which is very little, but in his head, it was everything at practice. I would say, before you leave, you're going to tell me 3 good things you did today.
It made me angry.
and I'm going to tell you. Go ahead.
I was going to say that for me, the reason was because we're striving for perfection so hard that we're always focusing on the thing that didn't work or the next thing that we need to learn. There's always more. And that's great. But the problem, the way I had to learn, let me back up to him saying that. He actually literally did. He literally said, you've complained every practice, and I don't see you making as many mistakes as you think you are making. So you now need to tell me 3 things you did well. And I felt myself literally get angry at it because in my mind, that's bullshit. Completely. Because if I'm doing it right, why the hell should I pay attention to it? Right? You are throwing me off track. I am dying here trying to fix my mistakes, and you're making me think about crap that I'm already doing right. What is the point? The point is, if you're not aware of that, you have nothing to build on. My analogy, once I realized that I knew he was right because I was angry. That's the only reason I got angry. If he was wrong, I'd be like, yeah, whatever. What I realized, the analogy that came to mind for me was what I was doing was I was like a master house builder, and I'm building a house. And as soon as one brick went wrong, I was like, threw the whole house out and started all over again. Well, that's stupid. That's what I was doing to myself. You have got, if you want to truly be honest to yourself, like Al-Anon said in the first place, if you want to truly be honest to yourself, you can't just say, this is everything I'm doing wrong. You have to be the guy who also says, I'm doing this well, so let me build on that and be honest. And that was what I realized. That's what Brannos taught me was, Here, I thought I was being brutally honest with myself, and I was not. I was ignoring the things I had done well. So brutally honest means you have to be good to yourself sometimes too.
Good, man, because you won't find the joy if you can't feel good about the successes
That's
and the
exactly
things that you're
right.
doing well. You won't find, and I think we all started doing this because of the joy of combat and the joy of fighting. And now we have to be able to find joy differently.
Yeah,
I agree
that's
100%.
absolutely right. Absolutely right. So I know we're over time here. I don't know how far I want to keep.
Yeah, yeah. Sean,
Thanks,
how about
guys.
So
how about we go ahead and wrap this up, and we'll get another session. And
yeah, I'll just briefly cover, kind of how I wrap that. I mean, success to me, like I said, long ago, it stopped being about wins and losses, and success to me now is when a guy like Brannos says, "You need to go fight Sean." When Al-Anon says that, when Gregor, from the East Kingdom a couple of years ago after Adult Swim, he'd mentioned something. He's like, everybody knows I like a good stand-up fight, and Sean always delivers, and that's it. It's like, it's not how well. I mean, I know whether or not I fought these guys well, but for me, that's my measure of success is just having the best fighters in the world say, "You got to fight that guy."
yeah, it's kind of funny, I get this, and I get this a lot, and I get a ping out of nowhere on Messenger, and they like, and I ask students to do this all the time, or just people I work with, and that is like, tell me how it works, and I really mean that, because I'll get somebody message me and say, hey, I finally threw that shot, and it worked perfectly, and I'm like, yes, that's success.
Yeah.
For me, it's just because I'm wrapped up in that end a little more nowadays, but I love when I've helped somebody.
Well, especially as a trainer now. I mean, that the joy that I get now
Oh,
is having other people be successful with the tools that I gave them. I mean,
yeah,
that's what keeps me going anymore.
absolutely.
But winning is still fun.
Nothing wrong with winning. All right, Sean, why don't you go ahead and wrap it up, and
All right.
then we'll arrange another one, and we'll maybe throw
Yeah.
something out there to see what they want us to do. One way or another, we're going to get Al-Anon back because this was awesome.
Yeah.
Hopefully you enjoyed it, Al-Anon.
I did. And whether we do this in a coach's corner kind of perspective, or if I do it off my own page or whatever, I really do want to see everybody's guards. Show me your guards, babies. Let's get it, and let's group think how we can improve people's guards.
Yeah, we can definitely make that
Awesome.
happen. So, Your Grace, Al-Anon, thanks for indulging us and coming on. It's been great hearing your perspectives. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is how this whole thing started. Was us having a conversation and having these, and hopefully we'll be able to have some more of these conversations with some of the other great fighters out there. I think this is something we can definitely throw in the mix here. But just being able to, and I think it's a brilliant question that Rifkin asks as part of her final 10 in her interviews. If you could talk stick with somebody for an hour, or going on 2 now, who would it be? It's a great question, and definitely glad to have that conversation. I think, do we have our topic for next week?
Hey,
Tristan,
before you do that, let me say goodbye. Thank you
Okay.
guys so much. Sean, thanks for inviting me onto this. Thanks, Misty, for hosting us through this and kind of herding this group of cats. It's great to see my dear friends, Tristan, Ragnvaldr, and Brannos, and to connect with everyone during these weird times. Thank you guys for doing this. One of the ways that I'm going to measure success is hopefully at some point my success as a trainer, and you guys getting me a chance to come up and work on this and help codify these things the way I think is a big first step of that. So thank you so much. I will treasure this experience. I really will.
Thank you, my
It's an
friend.
honor. We love you, buddy. It's good to have you here.
Yeah,
Definitely. All right, Tristan, do we know what topic we're covering next week on the?
Yeah, next week we're going to be doing the topic on longevity of fighting, and we're going to have Duke Paul Bellatrix is going to come on as a guest, as well as Viscount Sagan is going to be coming back. 2 people that have been high level of competitiveness for decades. So definitely join us for that one. And I believe from the poll, the one following that one is about getting your gear together, the equipment that is going to help you perform at your best. So those are the next 2 Fridays, I believe, coming up.
Excellent. So great topics coming up. And for those watching who are not familiar with it already, feel free to go over to SCA Coaches Corner on Facebook. We also have a YouTube channel under the same name. And again, as mentioned here several times, we love the questions. So throw some questions up there, and you have some of the best coaches and trainers in our sport available to you to answer those questions. So definitely them up there. Like this special shout out to Sir Rifkin for hosting this week.
Heck
Thank you
yeah.
so much.
That
It's
was
been
awesome.
gold to sit here and listen to all this. It's gold.
Do you have writer's cramp, dear?
No,
So yeah, thanks for hosting and fielding the questions for us. Really appreciate that.
no.
So yeah, with that, thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you next week.
Good
Have
to
a
be
good
here with
night.
everybody.
Bye,
Have a
everyone.
good evening.